Hello, everyone. This is Dwayne Newstater and Tony Tressel with another episode of Tree Actions. And with us today is Jeanette with Trees. And Jeanette, we always start off by kind of asking people how their journey began in the trees, whether it was actually at a tree company or for some people it's when they climbed trees as a kid and it stuck. So, um, where would you trace back your beginnings in trees?
Well, well, for me, honestly, it started as a childhood. I grew up in a pretty interesting neighborhood, community where I didn't actually live in town. I lived out of town in northern BC, or sorry, Alberta. Um, and trees, this sounds so childish, but trees were literally my friends. I would go to the forest and I would just kind of hang out with, because there were kids my age, so I just kind of hung out with the trees. And so a lot of it were spruce trees and a lot of aspen type stuff. And I was really lucky that I got to hang out in places that were transitions between urban and natural. And I've pretty much followed the trees ever since. Like every time I get hit with a challenge in life, I just go walk in a forest somewhere and take those questions with me. And when I exit, I always feel like I have at least a direction to go. So when I found out, I had left, like my first love is logistics. I love puzzles. And I had no idea what to do for a career. So I'd gotten into like shipping, international shipping. And the career just didn't have longevity for a young person. So when I was talking to HR and he said to me, sorry, you just really aren't going to find what you're looking for in this industry, there was a gardener behind him working on a tree. So I was like, I can do that. I'm a farm kid. So I grabbed a trailer and a couple shovels and a wheelbarrow, and I got myself into some small projects that were easy. I've always had a love for single moms and elderly, so it makes it easy to work with them, and they generally want to do something that's to the betterment of the environment that way. So through that process, I got involved with a much bigger landscape I had no right in being in. And Verna Mumby was next door. So I went over to ask her some questions, and she wagged her finger at me. I will never forget this conversation. She looked at me and wagged her finger. You need to get educated. I'm like, cool, can I work with you? I didn't know that she was actually moving locations at that point. So that was in Edmonton. And she's like, for that tree, call Chips. And Frank showed up in a truck with 4 guys. Steve Draper was the youngest, and he was working on the spruce tree in the front. And Frank went to the back with 2 Italian guys, and they couldn't speak each other's language. And that was it. I ran to the liquor store, grabbed a case of beer, threw it on the sidewalk, and I'm like, I'm in. How do we do this? Because I just thought it was really interesting that people could work together safely and do like epic, adventurous type labor work without speaking each other's language. I just thought that was, okay, that's the language I want to work in.
Cool. Interesting. And that was in Edmonton.
Yeah, so Edmonton trees, all 5 species, get kind of boring really fast. I'm just kidding. But I definitely, I was at a point in my life where I had always had a jump bag with me, so overnight bagged, that if an adventure showed up, I could take it. And so I happened to be at one of your courses in Burnaby or Abbotsford. It was Abbotsford when 2 storms hit, and Frank was bringing his truck through and doing a storm response, and I pretty much grabbed my gear bag and was like, okay, how can I be useful? I was completely not useful. I was so young in my career and knowledge that I essentially was just a support person. And I don't mean just a support person, because everyone hauls their own weight on any crew. But I saw some really interesting adaptations through storm work. There's just so much going on and you're exhausted, and I was just very lucky that I was working with some really safety-minded people in some really sketchy situations. So I tucked tail. I was like, yeah, those trees on the coast are too big for me, but I had vacationed in the Okanagan enough times that I was like, yeah, I'm arrogant enough. I can drive a chip truck and a chipper in the Okanagan winters, and too chicken to drive in Ontario, which was my other option. I could go to Guelph. And these were all, recommendations through you that, you let the other people you knew in the industry know that there was a keener.
Yeah.
And so I came out here to work for Arbortech, and my career quickly went from, being a climbing arborist. I tried my first competition and, won by default because I was the only person in my category at the time. And I came back and wanted to do a better jump at footlock, of course, being the awfulest of all awful. And I broke my foot in training.
Ah.
And then a storm hit. So the best thing I could do was drive around the truck, connect with the people, talk to them about their needs, which brought me into management, which then translated to legislation coming in and changing all of the pesticide use for homeowners to being products that are a little bit more safe. So then I went into educating homeowners on options going from, spraying a cloud of chemicals that kill everything to selective pesticides, how that works. And so, I was forced into understanding how backyard fruit tree worked. And then I met Mario Lantier, who's with Crop Health Advising and Research, and he introduced me to doing research. So every time we'd go out, we would be doing field data collection, and then I'd come in at the end of my day exhausted and have to write a report explaining what I saw. And that was for about 5 years. And he's like the Dr. Doolittle of tree care, and really high expectations on report writing and making clarity. And wonderful was that I was able to adapt my love of photography to tell a story. So I could write my reports through photography and giving examples. And he really believed in the conferences. So I got to work with Gilman one-on-one quite a few times, which, are you kidding me? It was really interesting to be able to ask those really hard questions and then understand kind of behind the scenes of how the research becomes legislation. And I've been struggling with that ever since.
So would you say it's, oftentimes when you journey into these types of, what's the word I'm looking for here? Like research, there's the altruistic side and the wonderful side of it. And then when you get into legislation and the politics side, it can be quite disenchanting sometimes. Is that what you mean by that? And how long it can take, or the seemingly nonsensicalness of the legislation side of things?
Yeah, all of that. There's I kind of often think of it like merging into traffic. The roads are already paved, the traffic already has flow, and you have to somehow offer what you have to offer in a way that's not going to cause an accident. So there's some areas that I know I can't make any changes to, and then so I'm just trying to find those pockets of the flow where I can be useful. And that's where the last couple of years, probably 4 years, the void years that I would prefer to use than the C word, gave us all, like in horticulture, an opportunity to really reflect. Our industry exploded because people were suddenly interested in their homes. They weren't traveling, they weren't busy, and so a lot of people were, well, I would like to do something, and investing in my home is the best option. So at that time, I had started teaching at the local college, an introductory kind of horticulture program. And I, with permission from the previous instructors, kind of made some adaptations where we started the class in reaching out and doing kind of public gardening offers, I guess. So depending on what the students want, because of course horticulture is so broad, and homeowner and landowner needs also so broad, we started picking out stratas as needing the most help because they have the least amount of budget to work with. And so we would get into projects where we're part of like a collective of homeowners who work together in trying to manage the adjustments. And a lot of these places are getting to be like the 25, 35-year-old landscapes. And in any place that I can find a space that a tree has potential to actually go through to maturity and over maturity, I kind of get my football shoulders out. And to be able to do that in a way that people are going to listen to you, you have to go about it in a collaboration, welcoming type process. So there's that give and take, that merging of traffic where they have their priorities, it's their land, and then how do you add the education in a way that somebody wants to actually listen and adjust how they're thinking. And so I try not to get involved with the legislation. I try not to, like, if it's political, I really start to pull back and really start talking really to the people who want to, save their own trees. And so that's where Kelowna Tree Protectors came in. I'd been talking with Blair Stewart of the city of Kelowna for years about a citizens group of tree-minded stewardship. And we just had this opportunity. We had some other volunteers who were interested. And this is where I actually just finished talking to Bev. She's taken the lead role on that. And it's difficult for me because I had a conflict of interest. Like, how do I manage my ISA standards code of ethics while guiding a community group who are wanting to protect trees, for example, that present hazards? So how do I offer that? And then homeowners who don't have can't afford the tree work, how do we build maybe a fund like they have for heritage homes where there's actually a funding available for assisting with the care of a tree as it's getting into mature and over maturity. Does that answer your question, or did that go off in a far off tangent?
Oh no,
Sorry.
well, there isn't a right answer. So
Cool.
it's all good. It's that's fascinating though. Like a preservation model and fund to help people, and like care for old mature trees or historic trees. Do you have a process of like how do you identify how would a tree qualify for that funding?
Well, it's a bit of a think tank idea at this point. There is already established in the city of Kelowna a heritage fund, and there are some grant applications that people can apply for various reasons, as long as they're keeping their heritage home within the heritage parameters. And we, unlike a lot of coastal cities, we don't have a tree bylaw for residential owned trees. So people can do whatever they please with their trees. And the city of Kelowna has a bylaw protecting publicly owned trees. And so the conversations are quite complicated in how do you introduce a bylaw? How do you manage a bylaw? How do you make it so that it's something that creates that welcome to want to work with trees? Because I'm assuming the most common approach is just simply create as much of a clean slate and then rebuild, whether it's a building or a recent project we've been working on is a government-funded housing project, and they had some gorgeous trees in an older part of town, and the trees previously had been planted with each of the small single-dwelling homes. And they're coming in with a program where they're building, higher density, and they need amenities, buildings, et cetera, and access and emergency access type points. And so we had, I may get the number of trees wrong, it was over 25 trees. Berna had identified them, valued them, and when we went to council to say, hey, can we adjust how the building and landscape is going to be designed in favor for retaining more trees, essentially council told us we were too late to the table and there's nothing we could do about it. And so Kelowna Tree Protectors as a group decided that we didn't want to be a group who were making more trouble. We wanted to, just honor the process and then hopefully going forward be a part of the table at the beginning stages when we can actually do some guidance. So we actually brought some volunteers, they brought some signs, and when the trees were being removed, we just celebrated that the trees existed. And now we're hoping in triggering some of that ongoing care, because as we know with the root cutting, the changes that are happening, that's going to affect the more mature trees more drastically. And how do we balance, too much love with just enough to keep the trees alive? And we have some really interesting copper beeches that have gone through stages, and one on a different development is very much showing signs of significant loss. So we're looking at post-construction 4 or 5 years, and 50% of this gorgeous canopy is lost. We have another one at the college that was managed around, and it's doing wonderfully. And then we have these 4 that are in current construction. And recently, the city of Kelowna has had an adjustment to council, and they're way more receptive to having this a part of their development plan going forward. So there's this transition of projects that are, that's 10, 12 years ago that these projects were approved and have gone into the process, and it's really difficult to apply new legislation to existing processes. And so that's the transition that we're asking the community to understand. And I'm finding in my own business that I really love those really difficult situations of the transition areas, those spaces between natural parks and urban spaces. And I'm trying to figure out how to balance that in a way, and hopefully in a way that looks at trees being given priority.
We talk about Tree Actions as a human forestry podcast. And one of the concepts behind that is that there's a lot of similarities that some of us draw and from parallels from working in trees professionally to our personal lives as well. But I'm just, as you're talking about this, I've been thinking thinking of us as a human forest, and relating it to trees. How do you see what you're doing with the alliance and the efforts you're going to communicate these trees value and heritage value and everything? Where do you, if you were where in the human forest, what type of tree or what riparian zone are you mimicking from the forest into the human forest in your efforts, do you think?
I'm very lucky in that I've been able to lead a pretty selfish life, and that I don't have dependents, and I don't have, requirements that force decisions. So I've kind of allowed myself a lot of time to float, and I call it divine timing, in that I try not to adhere too strongly to an economic-based calendar, which makes for a very interesting life. And I am not complaining at all. But it does allow for those contemplative times. So another part, because of tree work, and if I may say, in trying to keep up with the boys, I damaged my body pretty harshly, and to a point where I really started to wonder what it would be like as I grew older, because that wasn't a question I was welcome to. I got really sick when I was a kid, so I was cautioned to having a long life. So following the trees as an adventure and a choice was kind of my way of managing that possibility. So I've spent a lot of time with some really good yoga instructors and teachers, and learning a lot of really different meditative processes. And one of the pieces that I think isn't talked enough about is meditation in action. So doing a task, but in a meditative kind of mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where I find tree people are incredible, is because they, through the process and the techniques required and the focus required to do the job, they automatically get into that meditative process. And when you meet a fellow tree person, you almost have that connection as just unspoken, and you start talking about trees and roots and the community, and all of those people, all of those portions don't have to be talked about before you get into the idealistic of our job choices. So with that process, I spend a lot of time writing, and I've started collecting human stories alongside the characteristics that I know of trees. And I've recently started thinking of age diversification. It's something that is being repeated over and over again, whether we're talking forestry or urban forestry. And so the answer to your question is also part of my generation. I'm that little tiny generation that's like the middle child between like the older generations and the younger generations. And I feel like I pretty much can go through life saying, I know enough to get into trouble, and that's all I know. So, being able to just carry forward, some planks for the bridge between what has been done in the past and the possibilities of doing things differently in the future and incorporating technology into that. So I think that's kind of where my role is I have no ability to dictate or choose how the project is going to end or what that looks like. But what I can do is maybe, be a part of the relay race and just carry that baton from one generation to the next, and in hopes of like bringing forward the wisdom learned, as well as encouraging the next generation, and in hopes of them, being able to enjoy the shade of the trees that I plant.
Yeah. Interesting. It's so I usually ask someone this a little bit further in the podcast, but I think I might accelerate a little bit at this point and in this one. How do you draw parallels? Well, you mentioned you go to the forest for wisdom or guidance, and without getting too personal, could you shed some light on how that happens for you, or where that even comes from, and how trees impart that to you, like how that happened? Obviously it's personal and spiritual and energetic, I'm sure, but I think I know I'm curious, and I feel similarly, so I'm curious how you would articulate that.
I would have to thank Dr. Shago for that invitation. Of all the readings, and the only reason I know of him is through you, Dwayne. So thank you. The pieces that I remember the most are his invitation to touch trees, and I grew up hanging out with trees, so to me it's just natural to know that they are connected in all of these various ways that humans don't yet understand, because we haven't quite designed the technology to confirm what we know intuitively. But
Right.
when he spoke of the people who work with the trees and the plants the most, they tend to be the people who don't typically have the vocabulary to explain what they know. So when I go out, like for example, I was at Bluey Lake this summer. It's the first time I'd gone out there. I'd heard some wonderful reports about it, and when I went, it's in that transition period of getting to be a little bit well known. Gorgeous water, some really interesting deadwood and deadfall all among like the different ends of the lake, with these like a real clear clay soil base. So you have those really interesting reflections of blue and green kind of colors coming through.
Yeah.
But there's a path that goes from the main camping space to like a tip of land that points out into the water, and the path is very well worn. And just seeing the garbage and the footprints and the compaction of the soil all around all of these trees that are still determined to stand. And I'd gotten into this space of really thinking about, my favorite tree. People keep asking me, and my answer is always the tree no one knows about, like no human knows. It's living happily in its own little world. Yeah. And then seeing in action people loving the trees to death. And I just walk the path, and all of a sudden I'm hugging the tree. And I know that sounds so whatever you want to label that as, but that idea of Kelowna Tree Protectors, what we're trying to accomplish is allowing trees to be a part of the conversations and letting people play with vocabulary that they're not maybe comfortable with, and being able to express some of the things in the stories that they're connected to. So I absolutely love the fact that a part of my job is talking to people who love their trees so much that they're looking for someone to be able to translate what the tree needs. What does the tree want? And having that as part of the conversation. I'm on vacation right now, but a friend of a friend, he's like, I have a client, she just wants another opinion. I'm pretty sure this is a go, but it would be great if you wouldn't mind going and talking to her. We talked to her about the tree for about 5 minutes. I was there for an hour, and she wanted someone to hear the history of the property and how her grandparents came to have the property, what childhood memories she had with the trees, and how the tree was like a twig when she was a child, and being able to watch the tree grow and mature, and looking at the landscape, and her saying, like, my parents kind of overplanted. How do I choose out of all of these trees which trees should be kept and which trees should not? And if I go to sell the property, where do I invest my money? And all of these things are attached to the emotional connection we have with these trees that you cannot easily transcribe into dollar signs. And that's a big leap to go from those feelings into dollar signs. And in talking to Verna in the last few years and talking about like the direction I could take my career, I'm hanging on to a comment that she mentioned, that we need more people to be able to speak on the emotional connections we have with the plants around us. I'd like to push that one step further. And, this may sound so arrogant, but I'm going to go for it, is that the idea of having to do the mundane tasks before you can design the spaces. So I would love for arborists to be considered leaders in showing other horticulture related persons how to go about working with the trees. So, please forgive me, people, if they're listening, but like architects, for example, if they could, spend a couple seasons in hauling the wood of a tree that has to go. The tree is perfectly healthy. It's in a situation where it can grow to maturity, but it has to be removed because of design changes. And to go through that process, arborists have no training on what it's like to euthanize a healthy tree.
Architects.
Arborists have no emotional training. Doctors, veterinarians,
I see.
they all get training on how to deal with that emotion. We don't get that in our training. We don't get that emotional guidance on how to go about a job when it's a job that we're trying to accomplish in a way and still have honor for a living organism.
I can totally relate. I was doing a program once. It was a chainsaw felling program in Saskatoon, and Saskatoon's special to me because that's where I learned about trees in the very beginning. I mean, without having worked at the University of Saskatchewan Nursery, I wouldn't even be in trees, and I don't think so. But anyways, I went there, years later. I'm doing a course, and the U of S was hosting us because I still knew the head of grounds. He hadn't retired yet, and he said, "Yeah, you can come and fell." And we get there to look at the site, and there's these trees, and you could fell any of these. And these are trees that I've known since I was a teenager, right? And I'm like, "Well, what?" He said, "Well," and he's quite disgusted, and I could tell he's not happy. And there's stakes out, and he said they're expanding the science building or whatever, and all this is going. And he says, like, a week after you're done, like after this class, this is all getting bulldozed. And this has been a real mature section of campus, right? And there's an elm, a couple of elms, and some big spruce. Like, I hadn't climbed these trees or anything, but there was nothing wrong with these trees. Like, they were just, and he said, you can fell these, you may as well, because they're going to get bulldozed, right? And I could not do it. The class, like, oh, wow, I just, like, I can't cut this tree down. I just physically, I didn't want anyone to watch me do it. I didn't want anyone to see me doing it. I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to have to be the one to do it. The only thing, we ended up cutting a couple that I felt a little less badly doing and I justified it by it's going to get bulldozed, and it was a little more dignified death and purposeful death than what the bulldozer was going to give it. And,
Yeah.
but most of them did just get ripped down with backhoes. They didn't even get the dignity of chipping or falling, which I don't know if that's the right way to put it. I guess as an arborist, I view that as a dignified death, to a tree. I don't know whether it cares how it dies. Dying is dying. But then, here we are anthropomorphizing trees. But that really has nothing to do with it. It's the feelings I had. And I very distinctly, and I remember someone saying, like, what do you mean? I said, I just can't do it. I'm not going to be the one that kills these trees. And so I just chose not to. And it was emotional based. Like it was a uh, heartfelt or whatever decision. Like I was glad I wasn't there when they got bulldozed. I wouldn't want to watch it happen. So, I think that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yep. And then how many times have we had to harden our hearts against that? Swallow all of that, pick up our tools, go to the next job, and then repeat it.
And a friend too, there's an old in Halifax, a tree that had survived DED. It was never going to die. I mean, well, it certainly wasn't anywhere near death, and it was a couple hundred years old or more. And it was lifting the sidewalk, and they had gotten a new machine to remove snow, and it created a barrier, and so it had to go so they could clear the snow more effectively on the sidewalk. And he just like refused to cut it down because it's like this is ridiculous. And he said, "I'll go hand shovel that part of the sidewalk." And no, and it came down to where he was like, it was literally his job or the tree. And so he, pulled out every possible stop. He took as long, it took 2 weeks to remove it, close the road, had the power lines removed, like made it the most horrendous, expensive tree removal he possibly could. After he fought, like, did everything possible to save it, and it came down to, look, you either do this or you can quit. And and I don't know, it's interesting. I wonder, I should ask him how that, he was definitely emotional about it. There's no question about that. And he resisted it for as long as possible. And it wasn't his tree or nothing. It was just a big old tree that didn't need to die. And that's another example. I don't know, Tony, can you think of that? Have you experienced that?
Yeah, I mean, I've run across a number of people, clients that have wanted trees down for the dumbest reasons, like they're clogging their gutters. Like, well, they make gutter guards, and refused. I've refused to do it. Early in my career, I think I refused less because it was a technical challenge. Um, and I just saw the work for the work's sake. I didn't see the tree involved in it. But then, as I got a little more technically proficient, and it wasn't so challenging, and I started to see more for the tree and the trees board. And I've walked away from removals. I've never had to come to the. I was always secure enough in my career that when it came down to like either I take the tree down, I wasn't going to lose my job. They just weren't going to do that job if I was the only one that was going to do it. So I was fortunate from that standpoint. But there is, I think, and I thought a lot about it, especially now later in my career. Like I always tell people, I learned very early, good, you always do a tree inspection, right, before you climb it. So you go up and you check it out and you do all these things. And I still do that to this day, but it's different because now I'm introducing myself to the tree. It took me, 30 years to figure out that's what I was really doing. So I look at them differently. And I think about this a lot. I think in those situations for me, the emotion arises because that situation made me look at my life. That tree, I'm not going to anthropomorphize it. It says it has feelings and all that, but that tree is a living thing and I'm treating it this way. How am I treating other living things? It became a mirror to my interpretation of life, what I would do to that tree and how I would do it. And yeah, I don't, I always tell people now, if I never cut down another tree rest of my career, I'd be fine with that. Won't happen because unfortunately some trees do need to go and they need to go in a dignified manner. On the other side of that, I once did a large, it was a rather old, probably 120-year-old black walnut removal in a backyard. And it was time for it to go. The tree was a hazard to itself and everything around it. And the client was a retired former head of surgery at a major hospital. And just an interesting guy, he and his wife. And he watched the whole thing happen. And he sent me a very nice gift card for some money so my wife and I could go get dinner. And the best compliment I ever got as a tree guy is he said, you put the tree surgeon, or you put the surgeon in tree surgery. And this is a man that was the head of surgery at a huge, very, very high in his career. For him to call me a surgeon was an honor. And he said, he basically went on to say that, we appreciated that tree. Our children grew up under that tree, and you laid it to rest with dignity, and it was that changed my view of tree removal then too.
And it's such a specialized industry. Like I haven't gone and spent time globally as an arborist. So our communities seem to be kind of distant from each other. Like I don't know about, like, Dwayne, you've been able to collect a lot of relationships that are tree related, and so when you're faced with some of these kind of moral dilemmas, you can probably pick up the phone and call someone and go, hey, I have this situation, I need to just maybe process that. And that's where I'm finding in our smaller communities, the Okanagan is so special because it is all of the information and research we have to adapt it to our region. Like our region just doesn't fit in any of the other research that's been done. And so the people who are here, who have been working here and living here and been a part of this valley, have a real connection to their land and to their landscapes. And I think truly we have this community that can actually maybe teach a way of respectfully growing older in what that looks like, development, etc., in alongside the land. And there's some really special communities that, like the trees, I kind of sort of don't want anyone to know about the communities because I'm really happy with how they're able to manage their population in conjunction with the landscapes around them. But when we have a community where we can actually have these honest conversations, you feel better making your choices. Instead of making that choice and then feeling regret, you actually have someone you can reach out to and process that with. And I think, Dwayne, that's what you've brought to our community, is that you've really united all of us. And I'm curious, before I forget to ask this question, do you still use your callback of energy, or learning takes energy?
Yeah, well, I've adapted it. I haven't done it, but yes, it still comes up quite frequently. Well, we're doing a lot of specialized training. So safety, the one I'm using now, I guess, as far as a catchphrase goes, it's safety and control, which could sound bad, but like from a safety standpoint and from a tree felling standpoint, those two words make a lot of sense. But when if I'm teaching the biological side of things, then that phrase comes in, and it's not that it isn't a good phrase. I used it for so many years. You forget or whatever, but it certainly comes up. Like Tony's heard it many times, and he's very familiar with it. And anyone that knows me would certainly. I don't know if it was on my answering machine, like my voicemail. I don't know if it's still there or not, but it was there for years. But yeah, and it does, and it's true, right? It's so true. And what's interesting about that is I learned that phrase at a trainer course that had nothing to do with trees. It was just that learning requires energy, right? Which it absolutely does, and how you manage the energy in a room, and that's again, it just blows my mind how there's so many similarities between tree function and how we interact as humans and how we live as people. Like it's just the analogies are endless, and that's just one of them, right? Trees require energy, learning requires energy, humans require energy, life requires energy, existence, spirituality requires energy.
You could take it even further if you take, Dr. Shigo's quote. My favorite way to describe trees to people is trees are batteries, right?
Right.
Maybe they store that energy, right?
Exactly.
I'm going to have to beg forgiveness. I've run through my battery much faster than I had intended. So I'm down. I'm pretty much for every second losing a piece of percentage. So is there anything else that you want to chat about today?
Okay. No, it's no. Well, of course. I mean, we're far from home. We may have to schedule another. because I don't think we're done. But in closing, and we'll honor that, of course, and hopefully you don't lose you before you finish. How do you feel trees have impacted your life, not only professionally but personally? If you could share with us a little bit on that before you run out of battery. Speaking of energy.
Verna had done a couple of women in arboriculture conferences that allowed for the conversations to be a little bit more around tree preservation and kind of the feelings around trees. And that was the first time I'd seen Simard's work, Dr. Susan Simard's work, the first time I'd seen Kathleen Wolf's work. And those two changed my life, absolutely, in knowing, like, in choosing to be and have the arrogance to carry a chainsaw up in a tree. Like, it takes a special person, right? To like think, okay, I've got this skill and capability to be able to do this approach, and to do that as a female. All of my previous people who have studied and wanted to work alongside trees, the idea of perseverance because you believe in something that's real. And I think trees showcase that every single time you see a tree and you're like, how are you surviving in that space? How are you putting out that much energy and still living in this kind of drastic environment? And anytime I'm feeling like I can't manage whatever it is that I'm trying to manage, I can always find a sense and source of, yes, you can, through a tree.
Wow. That's very excellent. By the way, a call out our chapter conference. Wenda Lee's our keynote speaker, and Wenda's a powerful woman of the trees, and it's not that far from Interior BC. It would be pretty cool. Have you met Wenda?
I haven't. I've definitely heard, but never met.
And she's been on the she has an episode you could listen to on the tree actions. But anyways, your battery's going. We may want to consider having another chit chat, because it's really been a good, fascinating talk, and the feelings or the emotions of what it takes to do tree work. That is, I'm gonna have to chew on that. Like I say, I can relate, but I've never thought of it in a broad sense before. But certainly homeowners, absolutely. And I've, when I taught at the college, I would talk about this, like, arboriculture isn't just caring for the trees, it's caring for the humans that own the trees. And I remember being ridiculed one time by a student recently graduated college because they said, "You got pruning paint in your truck? What kind of crazy that stuff? Shigo says we don't need it." And I said, "Yeah, Shigo says that, and that's right." But I know homeowners that absolutely will not rest until and they're going to go paint them themselves. And we just had it on hand because that was for the people, not for the tree.
Perspective it's a balance. And as we age as a community and education, that's all something we need to encourage and allow people to make mistakes, allow people to say what's truly on their mind, so that we can actually build trust. So before I go, Dwayne, just so you know, it's taken me a long time to get up enough courage to be able to do this, because what just happened is kind of like my version of having a conversation with a superstar. Thank you very, very much for everything you've ever done, for the inspiration, for guiding my training in a way that encouraged all of this. And, not once did I ever feel like you questioned my ability to be able to accomplish. You pretty much welcomed me into the fold, handed me the tools, and I was just a part of the crew. And I really appreciate that perspective, because not everybody was able to do that as gracefully.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that, Jeanette. Thank you.
Well, I have a simple solution to all this. We'll just do a part 2, and I'll edit them together, and nobody will ever know.
That works. I apologize. I didn't ask about you, Tony. I am so sorry. It's nice to meet you, and I look forward to maybe another conversation. That would be great.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
get it on the calendar.
I'm pretty sure Tony, I can tell by his tone, we're going to have to be scheduling it. So we'll be in touch.
I will make sure to bring my battery pack then.
Okay.
That sounds
Thank you,
good.
Jeanette.
Take care.
Cheers.
Bye,
Yeah, but-
bye for now.